All right, stay that way. If Putin sends you any coffee, don't drink it.
Joe, little Joe Lindsley.
Joe Lindsley is quickly becoming an American treasure in broadcasting.
Welcome to Ukraine Bank.
Big news today. Ukraine says it struck a top Russian fighter plane deep inside Russia. Let's go to Joseph Lindsley in Ukraine. And are people talking about what happened yesterday, Joe?
Indeed, Bob. Hello from Lviv. Not only that, Ukrainians hit one of Russia's top class of fighter jets deep within Russia, but also using a Ukrainian jet with perhaps American supplied munitions. Ukrainians have hit. This is really the first time this has happened in a big way into the Belgorod region, just across from Kharkiv city and Kharkiv region. The Ukrainians seem to have hit a Russian munitions depot, and Ukraine says they also hit one of the major command centers in that region of Belgorod, from which the Russians have been attacking Kharkiv. So, looking at both of these sort of good successes for Ukraine, the downing of the jet deep in Russian territory, that's the type of work that Ukraine has been doing for a long time, using their drones to go deep into Russian territory. They still do not have permission to use any munitions or weapons produced in the U.S. to go that far into Russia. So Ukrainians are doing that with their own ingenuity. What we see in the Belgorod region, just across from Kharkiv, now that Ukrainians have this limited permission from the U.S. To use some U.S. weapons, they're using that to great effect. And as we look, Kharkiv city is becoming, it's compared to what it was a month ago, it is quite calm in Kharkiv city. I know some Americans and some American musicians from Ohio and musicians from Lviv. They just had a concert in Kharkiv, and when they planned to do this concert, they were a little bit nervous because when they made their plans to go there, it was pretty intense and scary there. But it was a calm weekend in Kharkiv city, and sometimes I see some people using the word stabilization, that the situation is stabilizing there. I don't know if that word is accurate. I mean, we do have the Russians have not made progress on the ground in Kharkiv region since about May 20th, so the Ukrainians have held them. But more than stabilization, what we do see is that the region is actually quite, especially Kharkiv city, is becoming quite peaceful. For so many weeks, the Russians from Belgorod region were using these precision, they called gliding bombs, but they would send them over Kharkiv city and cause immense destruction, and that's not happening. But meanwhile, as we look at this permission from the U.S., even though you can see that it works, that it's created it's slowed down the Russians and stopped them in many ways, but that permission is still limited to hit targets on Russian soil with Western weapons. And so what we saw today is something that people have been concerned about for a while. This morning, there were many rumors, and the Russians were heavily pushing this in their propaganda, that they had invaded, made a land invasion into the Sumy region, which is adjacent to Kharkiv, sort of between Kharkiv and Kyiv, the capital. And there were lots of, the Russians were trying to claim that they had raised a Russian flag in a village in Sumy. President Zelensky tweeted that there were and there still might be Russian saboteurs that have made an incursion across the border. President Zelensky said, as of this morning, the Russian flag has been destroyed and there is no enemy presence in the village. But it's important to note that in Sumy region right now, it's like what it was in Kharkiv region 2 months ago. Ukrainians knew the Russians were lining up to invade and they were forbidden. So in Sumy region, Ukrainians are still forbidden from using any Western weapons until the Russians enter Ukrainian territory, which is sort of frustrating for many people. Like, well, didn't we learn from what happened in Kharkiv? Do we have to wait for the same situation to happen to Sumy city that happened in Kharkiv a month ago? So that is a big thing weighing on people's minds. But certainly lots of energy about being able to hit that Russian jet that was on an airbase, because this has been one concern about F-16s coming to Ukraine. Can the Russians hit American jets, that are parked on Ukrainian soil? Well, Ukrainians are showing they can hit the Russians. And I think another big thing, you had the European elections, the European Parliament. And if you look at many of the headlines, they're saying that there's a surge in the far right. And indeed, I mean, they've made lots of gains. But even some sources are saying Moscow is winning. But actually, if you look closer, you see, for example, in Germany, the far right did make gains, and the ruling party in Berlin, Chancellor Scholz's party, finished in third place in the European Parliament elections for Germany. But the first place are the Christian Democrats, which the media is not really mentioning this, but the Christian Democrats have been critical of the ruling party of Chancellor Scholz's Social Democrats for not sending weapons to Ukraine. In fact, that they're the ones that have been putting the pressure on Berlin to send the Taurus long-range missiles to Ukraine that Germany still refuses to send. So you could also look at it. You see the story of the far right surge, but there also is a story of most people voting for the party that actually wants victory more quickly in Ukraine.
Joe, you mentioned you're in Lviv today, and that reminds me about a text we got from one of our listeners. Let me read it to you. Does Joseph endanger himself by telling you what city he's in? Obviously, the Russians would love to eliminate him. Do you think about that?
Bob, there was in the first few months, when we knew there were Russian spies here everywhere in Lviv, for example. I mean, they'd been here before the big invasion. They were preparing back then, of course. But now, as I was talking with a woman from Paris, a journalist, and we're talking about if Russia wants to get rid of you, it's more dangerous to be in Paris or Prague or Warsaw than in Lviv or Kharkiv, because the people here are united and vigilant. And so the danger here is from the sky, from missiles and rockets that might fall. But you can never be complacent. But it would be significantly more dangerous to go for a run in a park in Paris than it would be to go for a run in a park in Lviv, and or even in the U.S. And I was just talking with a Ukrainian woman in Germany, Irina, and she, she has to encounter Russians, in her life there, and I can't even imagine that here in Ukraine. And she leads this effort to examine whether or not the sanctions are actually working. And for right now, for example, in Berlin, there's this huge Ukraine recovery conference happening this weekend. And Irina said to me she's frustrated because all these people are talking about, investing in Ukraine after victory, but none of them want to talk about getting the weapons needed to make that happen. And then she also mentioned to me that in Chicago this week, there's this consumer goods forum. It's a fast-moving consumer goods. Former First Lady Michelle Obama is the keynote speaker. And several of the major companies there, including Mondelez and which is based in Chicago, and Pepsi and others, they continue to do business in Russia. And so there is going to be a pro-Ukraine demonstration outside of this conference in Chicago this week to make the case. Let's cut off support. These companies make lots of money in Russia, and their tax dollars help support to the Kremlin, help support attacks upon Ukraine. So that's some stuff simmering around the world. But yes, I feel safe at the moment here in Lviv.
All right, stay that way. If Putin sends you any coffee, don't drink it. It's Joseph Lindsley in Ukraine. Joe, Wendy Snyder will be checking on you the rest of the week, and I know you'll be in good hands. So I'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you for introducing Ukraine on your social media pages. That's very important that much more people can get more information about the situation here and how everybody can help Ukraine to stay stronger and to save all the world.
Что он сказал?
Well, which side are you on?
На чьей ты стороне?
Come on now. Oh, which side are you on?
На чьей ты стороне?
Ебать.